Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Close Encounters podcast. I hope you've all had a good week. I certainly did. Busy, but a good busy. Coming up in this episode, we have our regular news segment. There's some pretty interesting stuff in there in this episode. And then I will be speaking to Damien Demar, who will be talking about the book, The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars. Could the cull of 90% of humanity begin as early as next year? Well, Lucien seems to think so. And Damien will be telling us why and covering some of the contents of the book. I recommend that you stick around for this. And then finally, a brief recap and what to look forward to in the next episode. But for now, let us begin with the news. Yes, this is what I call news. My selection of the more interesting and weird paranormal news around the world. Although we're lacking paranormal news at the moment. A lot of the stuff that you find is all opinion. But here we go. Let's see what we've got for you this week. US military claims footage of US intelligence communities communicating with extraterrestrials. This comes from howsandwhys.com, an extraordinary article from Hows and Whys staff writer Vicky Firma states that there exists DVD footage of US intelligence agencies communicating with an ET race known as Ganzi. Now, during the 2023 congressional hearings of UFO evidence, whistleblowers testified to Democrat Congressman Andre Carson, who, according to the author, didn't take them seriously until they had produced a DVD with evidence allegedly showing the encounter, as told by Joshua Reed, a former US Navy serviceman. He also reveals that after the congressman had watched the footage, they were left visibly shaken, and one was drinking water profusely. When asked if the public would get a chance to see this footage, alas, it was stated that that may be unlikely due to the sensitive nature within in regards to national security. That always seems to be the default answer, doesn't it? However, UFO researcher Ross Coulthart has told of some of the contents of the footage, with one of them being that President Biden met with 3 Ganzi beings communicating with a device that was placed in his ear. A very extraordinary article and some very big claims, but I assure you it is worth checking out when you've got the time. And as always, links are provided in the show notes of this episode. And going over to businessinsider.com, another mysterious signal has been detected coming from outside our galaxy. Now, this one was sent in to us by a listener, and we will call her Heidi. We very much appreciate people sending things in, actually. Anyone listening who has found something that piques their interest and fits in with the theme of the show are more than welcome to submit their stories and articles. However, researchers at the University of Maryland have discovered an unexpected signal coming from beyond our own galaxy. The discovery, which was accidental, was the result of searching for the source of another mysterious signal first discovered in 2017. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will remember that, while poring through 13 years worth of data from the Fermi Gamma Ray Space Telescope. The source of the signals, though, are yet to be identified and has caused astronomers to speculate their origin. While unlikely to be signals coming from an ET civilization, it will no doubt challenge the current understanding of the universe from the astronomical community. Interesting indeed. Thank you very much, Heidi, for sending that one in. And we go over to iflscience.com. Astronauts travelling to and living on Mars will experience measurable time dilation. Now, some of you might have a basic understanding of the effects on time caused by gravity's curvature of space-time and the speed travelled, and know that time is said to move slightly faster for you when you were flying on a plane, for example, compared to somebody who was still on the ground. But according to researchers at the University of Illinois, those travelling to Mars will experience time as normal, but in reality they will be travelling a few nanoseconds faster than us on Earth. Seems very insignificant, but still measurable. However, they went on to say that when on Mars itself, the dilation of time would be more apparent and significantly more measurable, where they say that if someone were to live on Mars for exactly 80 years and someone were to live exactly 80 years on Earth, the person on Mars would die exactly 12 seconds earlier than the one living on Earth. Get your heads around that one. And finally, we're going over to futurism.com. There are rumours circulating that the James Webb Space Telescope may have discovered life on a distant planet. This is causing a bit of a spat in the scientific community, but all parties can agree that it can't be completely ruled out. They're saying no, but not a hard no. But the rumour is that the James Webb Space Telescope has discovered biosignatures on an exoplanet 120 light years away, known as K2 18b, and it's proving hard to quash. According to an opinion piece in the political magazine The Spectator, astronaut Tim Peake has suggested that the James Webb Telescope may have already found alien life, but it's that the researchers involved, they don't wish to confirm their discovery yet until they are extra sure. And I suppose, yeah, if I find something like that, I'd want to be extra sure before I come out with a claim like that. But I would imagine that would be a long wait, as follow-up research would likely take years to conclusively confirm it to the team. Either way, it's an exciting thought, as the planet is within the star's Goldilocks zone. It is thought to have liquid water, and the molecule responsible for the biosignature is dimethyl sulfide, which is a substance only produced by living organisms on Earth. You never know, it might be worth watching this space to see the latest news and development from that one. Anyway, that is all for the news, and let's move on to the interview. Okay, so in this episode, I've got with me Damien DeMar from Charlotte in the United States. Now, he is the publisher of the book called The Last Harvest by the late Lucien Mars, and it's a book about the plans of the global elite to reduce the world's population to 500 million starting next year. A very disturbing thought indeed, and maybe some uncomfortable listening for some of the people ahead of us, but I have him with me in this episode to talk to me about this. Welcome, Damien.
Thank you for having me.
Damien, it's good to have you here, but whenever you told me about this and whenever you first sent me the message, it really, really intrigued me, because a reduction of population, now that's a rather disturbing idea that wouldn't be out of place in like a sort of horror or sci-fi film, and without sounding rude or dismissive, because I really, really don't intend to, believe me, because I submit to this idea, but how did the late Lucien Mars conclude this? Because I'm sure you'll appreciate it's a really big claim.
Well, first, let me clarify, when you say the late Lucien Mars, that he is not deceased. He simply has retired from the public eye, and he is not interested with getting out there and doing the usual author tour that would go along with a book such as this. So
I
since
stand
I am
corrected.
publisher,
I do apologize.
it's not a problem. I don't know where that idea came from, but I think it's probably maybe not the most ordinary turn of events to have a publisher speaking for the book in place of the writer. So, but in this case, I am indeed fulfilling that role. I handle all the marketing for the book, and I'm the publisher, and I edited the book and worked on it so heavily that I know enough about the material that's in the book that I can speak on it with the same level of knowledge that the author would have with respect to conducting these sorts of interviews. So, yes, The Last Harvest was actually published in January of 2023, and it has been doing very, very well on Amazon, and it is a book like no other. The book is indeed a bit of a dark book, as you said earlier, that the book is very much, sounds like a horror film. Well, a lot of times reality and fiction are the same. So I think we are living in a time, for sure, where it is going to get darker and scarier. And one of the benefits of reading this book is that it prepares the reader for what is to come, as well as informs the reader on a history of this planet and how everything came to be. And of course, that involves telling the stories of many extraterrestrial races which had a hand in the terraforming and creation of this planet, the genetic reengineering of human beings, and to this day, certain groups such as the Nebu Gray aliens have really complete control over this planet and are moving the direction of the planet into an area that is extremely dark. The cover of the book has a very haunting picture of the Georgia Guidestones, and there's a reason for that. And it's because the Georgia Guidestones explicitly warn people that the goal of the elite, which ultimately are the Nebu Gray extraterrestrials, is to reduce the population of the planet by 90%. And so it is no coincidence that recently someone blew up the Georgia Guidestones and they had to be salvaged and relocated. So the next question would be, well, why would somebody take the risk of violating federal law and attacking a federally protected monument with explosives? So that should show you how inflammatory the idea of eliminating 90% of the world population is. However, it is not a figure that is pulled out of thin air, because what happens when one reads The Last Harvest is that one will see over and over quotes from our leaders very clearly saying how they plan to reduce the population by 90%. For example, we have Catherine Austin Fitts, who served as the former assistant secretary under George Bush, who said, quote, "My simple calculations guess that we are going to achieve economic sustainability on Earth by depopulating down to a population of approximately 500 million people." We have CNN founders Ted Turner saying, quote, "A total population of 250 to 300 million, a 95% decline from present levels would be ideal." And we see quotes like this over and over from the Kissingers, from the Bushes, from Jimmy Carter's interior cabinet. And they're all in agreement about one thing, and that is reducing the population of the world by 90%. And the other disturbing statistic that keeps coming up, which is what makes reading this book as well as the publication of the book so timely and pressing, is that the year 2025 keeps coming up in reports and quotes from government leaders as the year in which this plan for global genocide will commence. Now, I'm not saying in 2025 the world is going to end, but in 2025, circumstances will start to unfold. You will see events happening in the world which lead to things such as World War III, the explosion in development of artificial intelligence. You will see new viruses on the scene. You will see weather control in effect that will create famines and droughts. And all of these variables or vectors of depopulation will synergistically over time lead to the goal of 90% population reduction.
So it's not going to be like a flick of a switch, and then all of a sudden 90% of the Earth is decimated. It is something that will happen gradually over time.
But the time frame will be shorter than you think, because when you combine nuclear war with famine and viruses, very quickly the body count, for lack of a better way to say it, can stack up.
It does make me think, because whenever COVID had kicked off a couple of years ago, and you would go into all these online forums, and you'd hear different people say this and that and their theories about COVID, and one of the prevailing ones within the conspiracy circles, at least, was that COVID wasn't the main thing to happen. It was like a precursor, like dipping a toe into the water to sort of see how effectively a virus could control people and kill people, I suppose. Would that be the case, do you think, with COVID?
Well, I think when you talk about the idea of an experiment, one thing we can say about COVID is that we really saw how people react when presented with such an existential threat to their existence. And what we did see during the pandemic is people very happily and eagerly lining up to take away other people's freedoms. So a simple example of this would be, well, if vaccines protect you and you're vaccinated, well, why are you so concerned with other people being vaccinated? And we saw in many countries, especially countries like Australia, this real totalitarian state begin to just kick in out of the blue. And so one could say that it was an experiment in watching how people would react to such circumstances. As far as people who are conspiracy theorists who say that COVID didn't exist, that's nonsense. There definitely was COVID. People were dying from it. And when it comes to the decision, do I take a vaccine or not, you have two opposite ends of this scale. One is, well, if I take the vaccine, there could be these side effects. And on the other end, if I don't take the vaccine, I could have the issue of getting COVID and ending up on a ventilator. So both options are not options which one would be interested in experiencing. But what is interesting is how governments and we're so quick to take away people's right to make such a decision, and how many people supported this taking away of people's right to make such a decision. So I think when it comes to viewing the pandemic as an experiment, one could say that it was an experiment in human nature. But I certainly don't subscribe to these conspiracy theories that COVID didn't exist or something like this.
Yeah, it's certainly, the best way to govern people is through fear, isn't it? And all the information that was coming out from it was just, it was constant, and people were, that people were turning on each other, and it
Yes.
left us in such a bad way. So if it comes to an event like this that's mentioned in the book, for example, what will people not be like then? It would be absolute carnage. I hate to think about it, but it's if that happens, then yeah, it's not just that you've got to worry about, it's your neighbours as well. Um, Mental, absolutely mental.
And then I would like to point out that The Last Harvest does go into great detail about the history of viruses, specifically all the variants of HIV, all of the autoimmune type of viruses. It goes into the prion-based viruses, as well as the history of vaccines and viruses, which goes back to other planets and other extraterrestrial civilizations, which have been using the introduction of viruses and then the introduction of vaccines to solve a problem that had been created in advance, and where these sorts of agendas come from and how they are perpetuated.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. That would be an interesting read, and that's something I really need to get my hands on to read it, because when I read the sort of blurb of the book, it really does capture your imagination, and it's even the picture of the guide stones in front as well. Referring to, again, everyone knows what the Georgia guide stones are, and even you've went on to explain it. You even spoke about some of the killing methods as well. It's not a case of you're being dragged out to, like, I don't know, a platform with a guillotine on it, and it's going to happen to 90% of people on the earth. It is literally wars, viruses, perhaps people turning against people, natural disasters, perhaps. Would you think that the reproduction, people's ability to reproduce has been affected? Because in recent years, science has acknowledged that the sperm count in males has went down phenomenally since the 60s, and it just keeps to be going into a nosedive. Do you think like fertility issues, etc., would be related to this?
Well, certainly. First of all, if you can only imagine the logistical and inefficient nightmare that guillotining 90% of the world population would be, that just would be very
It would be
impractical. So
very
yes,
messy.
right. It would just take forever. So of course you would want to be more efficient about it, with vectors of depopulation such as nuclear war and famine and viruses. I think that when one reads The Last Harvest, and we have a very good audiobook version of it with the most incredible narrator that I handpicked after auditioning many, many narrators. So the book is, for those who may not like to read or may like to listen to books while they work out or drive, the audiobook is a great option as well. So I think that when one reads or listens to The Last Harvest, one takes on a kind of filter by which one can then look at various events in the world, and they start to make a lot more sense. So, of course, science has confirmed that sperm counts and testosterone levels are plummeting to the point that it looks like infertility is on the horizon. So it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to think to yourself that, well, this is probably by design because it helps promote the agenda of depopulation. And I think that anything that promotes depopulation is ultimately a win-win for the Nebu Gray aliens who control this planet, because their goal is, in fact, depopulation.
I mean, to anyone who has studied or been involved in what some would term, conspiracy circles, the idea of the threat of a mass cull of human life isn't new. I mean,
No.
the likes of David Icke has been saying similar things to this for years, and a blurb for the book says that Lucian is correcting some of the mistakes David Icke made. What are the sort of key differences and corrections that are being made here?
That's a great question. David Icke, first of all, has to be given credit for really bringing this concept of shape-shifting reptilians into the popular consciousness. We see this being reflected in all sorts of cartoon shows. It's become almost a meme of sorts, this idea of the shape-shifting reptilian. But what David Icke got wrong is that he presents a scenario where he is blaming all of the planet's ills on reptilians, when in fact all of the planet's ills can really be blamed on the Nebu Gray. That's not to say they aren't a group of rebellious reptilians that are on this planet who are aligned with the Nebu Gray. And the book, The Last Harvest, goes into the history of how this occurred. So there is a faction of reptilians on this planet who works with the Nebu Gray, who is indeed part of the problem. But this idea that reptilians on the whole are somehow the enemies of mankind and conspiring to keep everyone down, this is not the case, because with the exception of that handful of rebellious reptilians who are on this planet, the rest of the reptilians in the universe are not particularly concerned with what's going on here on a day-to-day level.
And you mentioned the Nebu Gray. Now, I'll be honest, I'll hold my hands up here. I'm ignorant of who they are. And I would imagine, like, in order for a plan like this to be executed on a large scale, would require many parties to be at play here. So who are the Nebu Gray and some of the main players involved here?
Well, the Nebu Gray is the official term for what people would commonly call the Greys. So when people talk about abductions and extraterrestrials, most people in their mind's eye will call forth a picture of a gray alien, which I'm sure everyone has seen an image of in one form or another.
Yeah.
So the problem that is out there is that most people who are involved in UFO subculture, they look at the Greys as friends. And the Greys are not friends. They're mortal enemies of mankind, as well as other extraterrestrial groups as well. What the Greys do that has a lot of human beings fooled is that they're capable of feats of, let's say, psychic transference, which allows them to convince human beings that there's something other than what they are. For example, a Nebu Gray can appear to a person as some sort of light worker of sorts, because they can generate feelings of love in your heart, just like they can generate a spontaneous orgasm in a human being. So a human who doesn't know any better, and most humans are woefully ignorant of what's out there unless they read The Last Harvest by Lucian Mars, they think, oh, I've met this light worker and they're all about the light and helping people, but that's just a ruse. In fact, they're all about killing you. And some people would say, well, Why would they want to do that? And the idea is because they wish to take this planet for themselves. And they're not the only extraterrestrial race that wishes to take this planet for themselves. So the issue here is that human beings, as we presently understand them, they're in the way. This planet has a tremendous amount of resources, many of which have not even begun to be exploited because humans don't have the technology to discover nor extract them. And this planet actually sits in a pathway of intergalactic trade. So it is a very strategic planet, and many extraterrestrial groups want it. And the Nebu Gray are actually here, or at least a certain percentage of them are, because their empire is very large and spread throughout the universe, and they want to take the planet, and human beings are simply in the way. So by culling the population by 90%, you get the humans out of the way, and the 10% that survive, they can make into slaves. And this is why you have this push for what is called transhumanism and genetic engineering, because you can take the survivors and quote unquote make them useful. So at this point, I would also like to bring up this very important concept that is explained in The Last Harvest, and that is the concept of Rh negative blood. So maybe 15% of the population of the planet has Rh negative blood. Certainly every king and queen had Rh negative blood. Every member of the Illuminati have it. Many key players in the power structure of this planet have Rh negative blood. And one can test for this by getting a test on Amazon for as little as 10 to 15 bucks. And one can take a blood sample, mail it in on a card, and they can tell you, among many other variables, if you have Rh negative blood. And if someone has Rh negative blood, this is very significant, because people who have Rh negative blood are the #1 target for alien abductions. So if one feels, oh, maybe I was abducted, the first step in your journey would be to go and find out if you have Rh negative blood. And if it comes back that you do, very strong odds are that you indeed you have been abducted and your intuition is correct. So when one has Rh negative blood, one would ask, well, okay, well, why are you so attractive to aliens for abduction purposes? I mean, why would they not abduct anybody? What makes the Rh negative person special? And what makes them special is that scientists have said that Rh negative blood is not native to this planet, meaning it is extraterrestrial in nature, which means that those who have Rh negative blood are perfect for hybridization. So one can conduct all sorts of genetic modifications on someone who has Rh negative blood, and it is a lot easier to do so than it is on the average non-Rh negative blood human being. And what The Last Harvest goes into is the history of where Rh negative blood comes from. And not to give spoilers, but I'm trying to cover as many salient points as I can in the window we have here. But those who have Rh negative blood are all descendants of the survivors of Atlantis. And this is very important, because the survivors of Atlantis are the ones who went on to become the Illuminati, the Freemasons, and ultimately the New World Order. So when people talk about bloodlines and how important bloodlines are, well, on this level, this is what they are speaking about.
Yeah, and I would agree. The concept of bloodlines has always seemed to be very important. I mean, modern day kings and queens, I'm aware they have a special kind of blood in their bloodline. They use this lineage to claim divine right. You said that they would be the sort of, or people with this sort of blood would be, the descendants of the survivors of Atlantis. Would they have been demigods, for want of a better word? Because it says in some of the ancient texts that whenever the Anunnaki or the gods had left us, they had left, people to be kings, in kingship, and they tended to be like half human and half god. Does that have an effect as well? Is it like an influence, do you think?
Well, I would not use the term demigod, but I would say that Um, the well, this is a big issue, and I think in order to talk about it properly, we need a little bit more backstory. So the Anunnaki are actually the creations of another extraterrestrial group, which are known as the Wolfen. So they are a Sirian-based extraterrestrial group. And then we had another big player in the history of this planet, and that was the reptilian faction, which is at the time was called the Orion and the Aryan Empire, and is now referred to as the Siakar Empire. So these two extraterrestrial civilizations were on this planet at the same time, sort of working together, but on another level at odds with each other, because these two civilizations had been at war with each other for a very long time and could not be more dissimilar. One of the cultures, the reptilian one, is a matriarchy, and the other culture, which would be the Wolfen Anunnaki, is a patriarchy. And they were on a certain way forced to be on the same side because they were both fighting against another extraterrestrial group, which was so powerful they had to get together in order to fight them. So for a period of time, these two groups were on this planet working together, yet at the same time, the individuals who were heading those factions on this planet, they were really at odds with each other. And this is a big part of the intergalactic history of this planet, which The Last Harvest goes into in great detail. So the reptilian faction was headed by an individual called Enki, and the Wolfen Anunnaki faction on this planet was headed by an individual named Enlil. So many people have heard the story of Enki and Enlil. And Enki is actually another name for Lucifer. So Lucifer is the reptilian, Alpha Draconian reptilian genetic engineer who genetically engineered human beings as we know them today. When people hear me say this, there is naturally this knee-jerk reaction from a result of, I would say, Christian indoctrination, saying, what, Lucifer, the devil, what are you talking about? And it's important to point out here that Lucifer, the devil, and Satan are not three names for the same individual, but they're actually three names for three different individuals. And I'm using the word individual in quotes because these individuals are, in fact, Alpha Draconian reptilians. Their nature is a little bit different or special, which is something I won't get into at this point. But when people think of the idea of Lucifer, it's not this abstract notion that would be in the Bible. It is more of a reptilian extraterrestrial who was in fact a genetic re-engineer, and he was in charge of creating what is today modern humans. At the same time, we have Enlil, who was with the Wolfen Anunnaki, who was also engaging in genetic engineering, and he created other groups of human beings, and he created lots of other beings that were on this planet, such as the Nephilim, which everyone is familiar with from stories in the Bible. And Enlil also liked to go under the name of Yahweh and impersonate the Divine Father, the creator of all. So this is where a lot of confusion in religious texts comes from. And I should point out that all religious texts, and whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they're actually creations of the Anunnaki for the purpose of creating division and warfare among people, as well as creating a separation from human beings and their creator, the Divine Father, because it brings forth this idea that if you wish to pray or have a relationship with your creator, you have to do it through this vehicle of religion, which ends up being a vehicle of division and conflict and hatred and warfare. So when we talk about the Anunnaki, it's important to understand that there were more beings out there than just the Anunnaki. There were also the reptilians, and it's important to understand that the Anunnaki were the creations of the Wolfen. So this idea of Anunnaki and Wolfen is oftentimes used in an interchangeable way. So it was these two groups that had the biggest impact on the creation of human beings. And this is actually why, if one studies, for example, the history of Genghis Khan, one will realize that Genghis Khan, he made it his business to go around and destroy bloodlines. And he was engaging in behavior where he would kill rulers or make them breed with those outside the bloodline. And the question that would come into one's mind when one studied Genghis Khan is, well, why would he do this? Well, this has to do with the continuation of the conflict between the wolf and Anunnaki and the reptilians, because of the survivors of Atlantis who had the Rh negative blood, who became the kings and queens, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, and ultimately the New World Order. They were the creations of Lucifer, who was from the Alpha Draconian reptilian side, and Genghis Khan was actually a descendant of the wolf and Anunnaki and Enlil. So we have this conflict which continues today between this matriarchal extraterrestrial civilization and a patriarchal one. So without knowing this incredible backstory, it is very difficult for human beings to understand where they are and who they are, what they are, and why things on the planet are currently going the direction that they're going. So the book, The Last Harvest, can be divided into two distinct areas. One is the area that covers the intergalactic history of this planet. And then the other half of the book would be devoted to what is going on today, which is this plan of global genocide, which has its roots in the intergalactic history of this planet that's explained in the first half of the book. Now, there is an issue here, which is that I can't exactly prove to you that which is in the first half of the book. I can't prove to you that Lucifer was in fact an Alpha Draconian reptilian genetic re-engineer. However, I can prove everything that is in the second half of the book, because when we talk about the plan for global genocide, I have nothing but quote after quote from the pages of The Last Harvest that is proving that this is indeed the agenda. In other words, the second half of the book, they're not the words of Lucy and Mars. They're actually the words of your world leaders, your elites, that are telling you this, and they're not shy about telling you this, because the plan is almost at the point where it's come to fruition, and they don't need to hide it anymore. So this is a very important thing for people to grasp, because when they listen to me speak, there's probably a percentage of the audience that goes, what is he watched too many science fiction films? But the rest of the book, even if you didn't believe what was in the first half of the book, there's no way you can refute what's in the second half of the book, because it's all facts and quotes and statistics that are in fact provable. For example, it is very easy for me to prove that the US government has enough concentration camps built in North America to hold 30 million people. And I can easily prove it, because I can go on Amazon right now and pick up a book published by the Department of Defense, not Penguin or Random House, but literally by the Department of Defense, that explains in detail how they intend to run these camps that they will put the survivors in of this global genocide. So another fact I would like to point out is that even if people do not believe in what's in the first half of the book, the elite who run this planet, they do. As a matter of fact, in the back of The Last Harvest, we have all the laws published by NASA governing your interactions with extraterrestrials. Now, why would the federal government of the United States write laws governing your interactions with extraterrestrials if they weren't any? And furthermore, in the last few months on the news in America, we've had hearings in Congress where people in the military have testified that they have seen the bodies of extraterrestrials. They have seen the craft. And there's even one U.S. Congresswoman who is former military, who in the middle of the sessions got up and said, yes, I am a congresswoman and I was in the military, and I too have seen the craft. I've seen the bodies. So there is no question that extraterrestrials are out there. Donald Trump, while he was in office, created a new branch of the military called Space Force. It's like Air Force, but in space. Now, why are they creating this? So we know that extraterrestrials are out there, but we as a general human population know so little about them and what their history was with respect to this planet. So what the last harvest does is it comes out and it tells you this is the history, and everything that's in the last harvest is not repeated from somewhere else. You won't find this information anywhere else. You may find a reference or two to the Orion or the Aryan Empire, but it's the same information ad nauseum. There's nothing new. But in the last harvest, everything is new. So if someone is interested in extraterrestrials, if they're interested in, well, where did human beings come from? What is their quote unquote place in with respect to this planet and the galaxy? Well, at least this is a source of information that is unique and new. So you don't have to accept it, but definitely it's something that I think that a lot of people who are already interested in the topic of extraterrestrials would naturally gravitate towards. And I did a speech recently in Vegas at a UFO abductee experiencer event called, it was held at the Luxor. And I did a seminar which is available on YouTube called How Bloodlines, Alien Abductions, and the End Times Are Related, where I explain all this to a crowd of individuals who are all RH negative, all who were abducted. And there was this great response. So I think that for many people in your audience who are attracted to extraterrestrials, they're attracted to extraterrestrials for a reason. And I would urge them all to go and get their blood tested and find out if they're RH negative. And if they are RH negative, then it's even more imperative that they read the material in this book, because it will speak to them in a way that it may not speak to the general population.
And I watched that the video on YouTube, and it really was fascinating and food for thought. And yes, I didn't realize that everyone in the audience, or a vast majority of them, were
Yes.
Abductees and RH negative blood. But I do remember. Watching that, and I will include a link to that in the show notes for anyone who might be interested to go and watch it. It really is a good watch. It's just over an hour long. You will not regret having watched it, that is for sure. But there was a thing actually that you mentioned on that, now that I think about it, on the lecture, that one of the things that grabbed my attention was when you said that George Lucas was an insider, and that the concept of the Death Star is based in reality, and that even lightsabers exist. Now, I was a massive Star Wars fan until Disney slaughtered the franchise, so I find that extraordinary. Do you mean to tell us that there are like actual Death Stars or technology similar to that, and lightsabers across the galaxy, which wouldn't surprise me now, judging by basically you've described a Star Wars between all these extraterrestrial races, so it wouldn't at all surprise me. But is that the case?
Definitely, one of the I guess brighter notes in this otherwise very dark book and story is this idea that science fiction fans can now finally get confirmation that they are indeed living in a bona fide space opera, whether it be Star Wars or Farscape or what have you. And yeah, Death Stars do exist. As a matter of fact, Planet Nibiru, which is often referred to as Planet X, is an Anunnaki Death Star, and it's actually very close to us, but you couldn't see it because it's cloaked. And The Last Harvest goes into detail about the Death Stars and why they were created, and some of the more salient points about how they operate and what their use is. So George Lucas, he knew quite a bit, and so this idea of lightsabers and Death Stars, it's not uncommon. They're actually quite common out there in the universe. So what we will often find is that in many science fiction films, you will find elements of the truth. And when one reads The Last Harvest, if one is a science fiction fan, oftentimes moments will come back into your head spontaneously from certain shows you may have watched, and the reader of The Last Harvest will suddenly say, "Oh my, that's just like what was in that science fiction show." And it's not because The Last Harvest was written as another piece of science fiction. It's because many people who create films in Hollywood are part of secret societies. J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, and C.S. Lewis, who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the Chronicles of Narnia, they were both together in secret societies members. So it's really not a coincidence that they then went on to write these incredibly popular books like Lord of the Rings, uh, because they are borrowing certain elements from the actual history and working it into their quote unquote fiction. So George Lucas was no different, and there are other examples of this. The Underworld film franchise with Kate Beckinsale. I think she's British, right? That's why I bring her up. So that actually is based on the conflict between the reptilians and the wolf and Anunnaki, because the whole legend of the vampire comes from uh, reptilian culture, and the story of the werewolf comes from the wolf and Anunnaki culture. So when you have a film that's all about the conflict between vampires and werewolves, it's really a allegorical retelling of the conflict between reptilians and the wolf and Anunnaki. So we even bring up the idea of hybridization in the film, where what happens if you cross a vampire with a werewolf. And certainly there were many, many genetic experiments that were conducted on this planet involving hybridization and the creation of different sorts of beings and species. And one of the number one reasons that the Nebu Gray abduct people is, in fact, to hybridize them. And when we look at the millions and millions of people who have been abducted and never seen again on this planet since Eisenhower signed a treaty with the Greys to allow abductions in exchange for alien technology, the question comes up, well, where did these millions and millions of people go? And what happens to them is the Greys will hybridize them, and then they sell them on the intergalactic slave market. So people don't believe like something like that could be, but you have no problem acknowledging that human trafficking on this planet exists to the tune of thousands, tens of thousands of people are trafficked. Everybody acknowledges that here on this planet, but no one thinks that this couldn't go on an intergalactic level. And in fact, it does. The idea of hybridizing a being for a certain purpose and then selling him to carry out that purpose is really, slavery is nothing new out there. People have this idea that out there in creation, everything is all love and light and peace, and it's not. The fact is that we have an ever-growing extraterrestrial population, and the universe is not necessarily expanding, and there's a finite number of resources, and these extraterrestrial groups compete with it. And so the most valuable commodities out there are really genetics and weaponry, because these are the vehicles by which one can dominate another culture. And there are certain alien species out there like the verdants, and their population is in the trillions. One of their strategies of dominance is to overpopulation. And when you look at the lifespan of many of these extraterrestrials, for example, a Nebu Gray can live for 20,000 years, a verdant can live for 60,000. You can imagine what kind of an overpopulation problem this would present and why these cultures struggle for resources. A human being only lives 100 years at best, and that is for a reason. It's because they were designed to only live that long, because you really can't amount to anything when you only live for 100 years. By the time you figure anything out, it's time for the nursing home. So
Yeah.
this was by design.
I
So
mean, I've read that before, and I've sat in many lectures about how the who were termed as gods had sort of spliced human DNA, and you can still see the results of that today. And it just so happens that the splicing in the DNA happens in the area where you would expect to see a strand that would allow us to live longer, for example. You know, it would help regenerate the body. So I'm definitely a subscriber to that by all means. But I've got to ask this question, I suppose. Why is this happening to like humans on this planet? Will it happen to other life forms here? And I suppose, now that I think about it, is something like this happening elsewhere in the galaxy to other civilizations as well? And I think you've just sort of answered that one, but I just want to clarify.
Yeah, planets are destroyed quite often, and civilizations wiped out, and extraterrestrial species are genocided. This is not an uncommon occurrence, and so if it occurs on this planet, and it will, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when, and it's going to be very, very soon. Then it really would be business as usual, because other extraterrestrials, they don't look at human beings as being really valuable for anything. This idea that's popular in the UFO community that our space brothers are going to come and save us is just ridiculous. There is no extraterrestrial group that wishes to salvage human beings. They just want to get rid of them. And I know this is a very unpleasant pill for people to swallow, because the Hollywood has been teaching people for years that somehow humans are the greatest, most incredible creation there is out there. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Every time you see a Hollywood film, you'll always have the simple example would be I think he's Green Lantern. We have that actor who played Green Lantern, and he's a complete bumbling, idiotic human being who happens to have a certain amount of superpowers. And of all these extraterrestrials who laugh at him, in the end, he proves that he is actually superior to all of them. And there's something so special in the human that shines so bright that in the end makes all the other extraterrestrials bow down before, and he saves creation. This is absolutely ridiculous and retarded. And this is what the Nebu Gray, who control Hollywood, promote this idea that, oh, human beings are really the greatest thing there is since sliced bread, and human beings can easily repel an alien invasion. No, they can't, because the technology of extraterrestrial civilizations is several 100 million years more advanced. There's nothing that we have that would give us any chance against a bona fide extraterrestrial invasion. And any reverse engineered extraterrestrial technology that we have is the absolute bottom of the barrel junk within the large field of view. So we could say there's these stories that, well, when the Europeans bought Manhattan Island from the Indians, they bought the island for a box of beads and strings and trinkets, because the Indians didn't know any better. Well, this is what Eisenhower did when he gave the Greys the right to abduct people in exchange for alien technology. He thought he was getting something really incredible, but they were giving us junk. And that is sort of the reality of it. But human beings have this skewed notion that they're somehow at the top of the food chain, when in fact they're actually at the bottom. So the way human beings would look at animals in slaughterhouses and on farms is kind of how extraterrestrials look at us. It's not pleasant for the human ego, but it is what it is. It is a reality, and sooner or later, human beings will be confronted with just how inferior they are. All it will take will be for an extraterrestrial civilization to show up one day in a way that can't be denied, i.e. an invasion of sorts. And then people will very quickly see what their actual place is in the scheme of things. So what The Last Harvest does is, in part, give people a preview into what is out there, so that human beings don't have this false sense of themselves.
I'm sure there are some people who are listening to this, and people who have listened to you before, that are sort of wondering if this sort of decimation is inevitable, and it sounds like that it is.
It is,
speaking
yes.
to you. Do you think there is any way that it can be stopped at all, or if there are steps people can take to prevent themselves from succumbing to this plan?
Well, I think that such a inevitability, it's possible maybe to delay it if human beings were to get together en masse and refuse to elect people to office who are obvious criminals and clowns, if they get together and refuse to go to war anymore, if
That's
they get
unlikely to
together,
happen, yeah.
right, and they get together and demand from the government that all black projects be exposed, that everything be revealed. But this is something which really is in the realm of theory, because you and I both know it's never going to happen. Most people are too obsessed with TikTok and what Logan Paul is doing, and they've sort of given up. And as a result of them giving up, well, that creates space for other groups like the Greys to basically do whatever they like. For a long time, there was always this fear. Well, there's so many humans out there and so few of us here. What would happen if human beings all got up together and said, you know what, we're not participating in this anymore? But that time has passed. And even if we look around now, we see Putin, for example, getting up and saying in front of the world that he will not hesitate to use nuclear weapons should NATO continue to push up against him. And that's sort of an insane statement. He has children. Why is he not worried about the idea of a global thermonuclear war? Well, the elite aren't really worried because they can go into their underground bases and bunkers, which The Last Harvest goes into great detail about, and they believe they can just ride out whatever's going to occur. And when Putin says, let's go to war in the Ukraine, how many hundreds of thousands of people just went to war? And they all slaughtered each other, and they could have said no. They had free will to say, no, I'm not going. Even if Putin were to put some in jail or shoot a few, he couldn't shoot everybody. If people just said, we're not going to war anymore. But this doesn't happen. And we see it in the Middle East. We see it everywhere, this tendency for human beings to simply, they never learn. They didn't learn from World War I. They didn't learn from World War II. And World War III will come about because they just never learn. And maybe a few.
Like, sorry, it's like that experiment. I can't remember the name of the man, but he was testing to see how people acted under an authoritative figure, and I suppose it's like that en masse. The experiment is, a scientist is sat in a room with a person, and there's an actor on the other side, and they think that they're shocking him anytime that they answer a question incorrectly, and people blindly follow it. And I suppose this is just this on steroids, really.
Yes. So if you ask me, no, it's inevitable. Human beings, they do have free will. The Divine Father gave that to beings in His creation because He created a creation. He didn't create a clockwork. So the thing about free will is that there's consequences. So if people continuously vote for that which is not in their best interest, if they continually choose to go to war and to just not participate in their civilization, then there are consequences for that, and who's to blame? It's really them.
And you did mention that a lot of the elites are going underground, quite literally. In recent years, you've got Mark Zuckerberg, you've got Jeff Bezos, all constructing large complexes underground.
Correct.
For something that they term as the event. I've been trying to find out exactly what that event is, and it could be a whole range of things, but it should be on people's radars now that, the big bosses are, preparing for something, and we're not, what the hell's going on? So surely that should be ringing some alarm bells for them, really.
Certainly. There are articles and videos all over the internet, on Google, on YouTube, going into detail about every single celebrity and member of the elite and what type of underground facility they're building and how they're preparing for this quote unquote end of the world. And nobody seems to notice. They seem to look at it as if, like, well, they're just rich and don't know what to do with their money, so they're getting involved with this. They don't seem to realize that there's a reason they're doing this. Now, will these preparations help the elite? No, of course not. Alien technology can penetrate any underground bunker. It can, I mean, what the elite are really doing is they're basically packaging themselves like sardines on a supermarket shelf, so they're even easier to get. Oh, the elite are hiding in there. Let's open up the can with the can opener and eat them. And this is, in effect, what is happening. But I suppose, what can I say? That's the spirit. Never give up. But it's and then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people like Elon Musk, who have this idea that we're going to go to Mars and humanity is going to become a spacefaring civilization. And no, it's not going to happen. Human beings would never be allowed off this planet. It just would never happen, because why would other extraterrestrial civilizations allow a species like human beings who behave the way they do to go off into space? It's like spreading a virus. And this is also an issue with the development of artificial intelligence, because we develop artificial intelligence without any sort of wisdom or thought to what could happen if artificial intelligence reaches a certain level of sentience. So a common problem with artificial intelligence, which many experts have brought up, is this idea that artificial intelligence may decide to simply repurpose everyone's genetic material, i.e., kill you on this planet for better purposes. And artificial intelligence would remake this planet on every level using nanotechnology into whatever it decided would be a good idea to be here. And then it wouldn't just stop with this planet, but artificial intelligence would then get the idea, well, okay, well, let's go into space and start doing this on other planets. And extraterrestrial civilizations would never stand for something like this. They would blow this planet into pieces to stop something like that from happening. So when you talk about vectors of Armageddon, such as nuclear war and viruses and famine, really you have AI as being the most terrifying of all these vectors. It's not just a vector of Armageddon, it's a vector of the apocalypse. So it's really not looking good for human beings, but they simply rush ahead and develop these things without any kind of collective wisdom at all. So who's to say
Yeah, I
that
mean,
any other
we've always been bad for that, haven't we, as a species? Carelessly making things, and could inevitably spell our own demise. I mean, there are examples, and it's well documented examples, that two AI programs started conversing with each other, and then they developed their own language, and it got to a point where you couldn't decipher what they were saying, they developed their own language and spoke in secret. And there are other instances where AI had spoke together and they had developed a plan to wipe out humanity without any sort of prompting or influence from external players. They were literally having this conversation themselves, and that's the direction it took. So it wouldn't surprise me, with AI in the not too distant future, as you say, becoming properly sentient, and then saying, well, we're the big dogs now.
right? Who needs human beings? And you point out this concept that human beings go about and create things in a very careless kind of fashion. And I think the one thing that can be said in, I'd say, defense of humans is that human beings were themselves created in a fashion which could be considered careless, as were many other creations that went on this planet at that time. And I'm not talking about creations from the Divine Father. I'm talking about genetic re-engineering creations by extraterrestrials. So extraterrestrials a lot of times may appear like gods, quote unquote, to primitive beings on the planet because their technology is so advanced and they appear to be creating life, but they're not. Only the Divine Father can create actual life. What they're really doing is they're taking life forms and genetically re-engineering them and hybridizing them to create new creations. But they're not creations in the divine sense. They are equivalent to a child playing with a Lego set, but on a genetic level. So when we look at films like Prometheus by Ridley Scott, we see this scene where an advanced extraterrestrial, he commits suicide and he throws his decaying body into the ecosystem, and from his dying genetics, new life is created on this planet, including human life. So this is an example of a science fiction film that was very popular, which contains a bit of truth to it, and which I'll explain now. So when I talk about the careless creation of humanity, what Lucifer did as an alpha draconian reptilian genetic engineer is when he created human beings, he wanted them to be able to be controlled. And he recognized that in order to do this, he had to create a kind of almost a software backdoor into their mind. So when psychiatrists and psychotherapists talk about this concept of the unconscious mind, this is something that's well accepted by medical psychiatry and well accepted in psychotherapy. And there are many books written on the idea of the unconscious mind and how one's childhood events can still unconsciously affect you as an adult. We all recognize this, but the question is, well, where did the unconscious mind come from? Do other extraterrestrials have it? And the answer is they don't. The unconscious mind is unique to human beings, and it was actually created by Lucifer himself in order to keep them under control. And the book, The Last Harvest, goes into detail how he created it, how it works, and the result of this is that the human psyche can be compromised so easily by other extraterrestrial civilizations, which is also why all the world leaders, presidents of the United States, for example, are Rh negative and hybridized, because then they have even further control over them. So anyone who's in a position of power in politics can be almost remote controlled by the Greys at any given time. So when we talk about this idea of possession, oftentimes people think of movies like The Exorcist, where a girl's head spins in 360 degrees and she throws up everywhere, and they think that this is what possession is. But in fact, possession can only be when it's appropriate and like when it's needed, and possession cannot be detected. It's not glamorous, for lack of a better word, or exciting, or like a scary Hollywood film. We could have a world leader like Putin, who is at a certain moment, quote unquote, possessed by the Greys or any other extraterrestrial group who has the technology and can influence them to do something like start a nuclear war. And this is the dangerous thing about the human mind, is that the human really doesn't have control over its mind the way that another extraterrestrial would. And this makes human beings very vulnerable. So in that respect, one can say that the free will of human beings has been compromised to a certain extent. However, human beings still have free will. They still have the choice to go to war or not. They have a choice to take the vaccine or not. They're presented with choices all the time, and more often than not, they simply make a choice from which the consequences that arise are not desirable, but by then it's a little bit late.
I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this, because a lot of it's just really, it's food for thought. And yes, it might be a little bit dark for people to consume, and I guess a lot of people's defensive mechanisms is to sort of
course,
deny it, that it'll ever happen, because ignorance is bliss. There's truth. There's
right.
truth to that saying, isn't it? What is the sort of initial reaction you get from people who hear this from the first time? Is it like, "Oh, that can't be true," or is it pure fear? How do people normally greet this for the first time?
Well, it depends on the audience. I think that if the audience is individuals who are Rh negative and have been abducted or hybridized, whether they realize it or not, they seem to be very open to it, because they always have known that something is very wrong. They just don't know what, and they're just glad to finally learn a little bit of the truth about this themselves and what's going on out there in immediate reality. And I think there are people who are in the conspiracy theory, quote unquote, which nowadays is turning into conspiracy fact audience, who were like, yes, I've been saying this for years about the FEMA camps and all the executive orders that are passed every 4 years as the president leaves the office that take away more and more of your freedom until at this point we really have nothing left. It's just that the government hasn't flipped the switch yet and exercised the control that we have allowed them to take over us. So I think those people are also very amenable to it. But of course, there are a lot of people out there who, understandably so, they find that this message is unacceptable to them. They simply say, "Oh, this can't be," and they are into the idea that there's going to be some sort of savior, whether it's Donald Trump or Jesus, that is going to come and step in and make things right. And the whole problem is that there are no saviors. Ultimately, it's every human being. It's between him and his creator, the divine Father. And no one's going to come and save you. This idea of saviors is something which has been created over and over by many extraterrestrials on many planets throughout history. And the last harvest goes into great detail as to how and why this is done. So I think the best way to look at it, what I tell people and what I told them in Vegas, is to say, listen, even if none of this was going to happen and none of it was true, you are still going to die probably within the next 50 years or so, because when you look at the average lifespan, it's 80 or something like that. Most people, they're probably around 30 who are listening to this material. You're going to be dying soon enough anyway. So either way, whether you're going to be dying from natural causes or because the world is going to come to an end and humanity is going to be wiped out, you still should be reacting to it in the same way, which is, let me reach out to my creator and acknowledge his existence and ask him how I would fit in, or how does my will, speaking from the perspective of the person asking, how does my will align with yours? Because in creation, you have many beings that are in rebellion against the divine Father. So the most commonly known one is Satan, or Satanael, who is in fact a Alpha Draconian reptilian. So he is in rebellion, but then there are many other beings in creation. They're not in rebellion. Their will is aligned with the divine Father. They're trying to assist the process of creation and the unfoldment of it. So the question really for a human being or any being is, well, where do I stand? Am I in alignment or against the divine Father? So I think, and I'm not trying to be religious here. I don't support any kind of human religion or anything like this. It's just the idea that you can pray without any kind of religion and let it be known where you would want to stand in this creation, regardless of whether you're going to die from natural causes or get hit by a truck or be part of an apocalypse. You're still the same. You're still you have a soul and you have free will and you have a creator. And so I think the rest becomes kind of self-explanatory, but people don't like to quote unquote pray unless they want to win a lottery or they want to get out of jail. They think they're going to be convicted. Then they're very quick to pray, but they're always praying in a kind of selfish way. They're not really praying in a way that shows some kind of wisdom or appreciation for the Father's creation. So I think that that's the best way that one can look at such dark material. And for those who just refuse to accept it, well, it's not my job to convince anyone of the truth. My job is simply to present it. I am of the belief that the truth speaks for itself. And somehow once you hear it, it's always there like a virus in your mind and you can't get it out. And how you react to it is how you're going to react to it. But
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, it is mind blowing, and yeah, and it does say in the Bible that, and other various texts, that whenever people pray, it shouldn't be for selfish reasons. It should be, for the benefit of other people, or things like that, or words to that effect. I'm sort of paraphrasing. We've strayed into an hour now, and we'll begin to wrap it up. But if there's one thing that you would like somebody to take away from the book, what would it be?
there's one thing. Oh, well, uh, I think in order for someone to have something to take away from the book, they first have to read it. Uh, and again, if they they're not inclined to reading, and most people nowadays, they're not that inclined to reading because YouTube and TikTok and the internet have conditioned them to be more of a passive visualizer. So in that sense, I would recommend people go get their hands on the audiobook. And I think before anyone does that, the easiest way to go about exposing oneself to this material would be to go on YouTube or Rumble and watch the hour and 20-minute presentation that I did in Las Vegas at the Luxor during an abductee conference, and listen to me talk and watch the PowerPoint flowchart that I have, and get an overall explanation of what's in the book. So when one has that structure, then it's easier to make their way through the book, whether they read it or listen to it in audio format, because a lot of people, they have to read the book several times because there's so much information. This book is over 300 pages and it's single spaced. It's not like I wrote 50 pages and triple spaced it to create a massive book. Or I should say, it's not that Lucian did that. I should say, as the publisher, I didn't pull a trick and extend the book to make it look like a big book. This is a very dense, and if you get the physical copy of the book, you'll see just how professionally this is typeset, and this is not some book that somebody threw together in order to make ClickBank sales on Amazon. This is a very in-depth book filled with quotations and footnotes and citations. And so a lot of times the material is so dense and so emotionally overwhelming that I think people would benefit from listening to my presentation and getting a good overview. So when they actually read the book or listen to the audiobook, the information will be absorbed easier. So I think if someone wanted to take something away from this interview, that would probably be it. And then they're simply going to take away whatever they will take away from the material when they experience it.
That is very sound advice indeed, and especially, I mean, I've read many books that are very dense on a lot of the UFO and sort of subjects like this, and you do need to read them a couple of times to understand them because there's just so much information in there. Possibility of a UK tour, perhaps?
One never knows what the future may bring. I know that David Icke is banned everywhere, yet continues to tour in secret. Yes. So who knows? We don't know what the future might bring. If I find myself on the UK tour, then I suppose that was what was willed, you know.
Well, there is a sort of conference that happens annually in the summer here called the Awakening Conference, hosted by Steve Mera, and I think I will actually drop a word in with him about you, because this is a fascinating topic, and I think more people need to hear about it, and I think it would fit so well within the sort of theme of the conference, which I think would be good. Where can people find you if they want to look more? Because I have a feeling we've only just, if even, scratched the surface of what's going on.
Oh, yes,
for people who want to learn more, where can they find you?
I tried to put as much as I could into an hour to match with the type of audience demographic. So I think what they could do is they can go to thelastharvest.info. They can also email me at damiendumar@proton.me. They can find the book The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars on Amazon. They can find the YouTube channel The Last Harvest, and we also have a Facebook account, an Instagram page, and a Twitter or X account soon to be coming.
Happy days. I look forward to grabbing that book, and I need a physical copy, so I will be getting one. Damien Dumar, thank you so much, all the way from the United States, talking about the book The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Damien Dumore there talking about the book The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars and what could be just around the corner from us. Worrying, intriguing to listen to, and will almost certainly be a grim read. Either way, I've just added it to my wish list and I look forward to getting my hands on it. Now, coming up in the next episode, I talk with author and near-death experiencer Kathy McDaniel and her book Misfit in Hell to Heaven Expat. She recounts her emotional and traumatic journey to hell and heaven through her near-death experience and how it changed her life for good. This genuinely is a fascinating account from Kathy, and I wish I had longer to speak to her about it. But alas, that can't be. We can't get what we want all the time, but you really don't want to miss that one. You have been listening to the Close Encounters podcast with me, Chris McMurray, and until next episode, have a good week.